Latest technology, the CD-ROM computer. This is a multimedia system.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to today's discussion. We are going to be discovering all about privacy in Canada today, and we're going to take a bit of an upbeat tone on the subject. And usually we're complaining about the laws not passing or passing, or the many different challenges. But I think that today is going to be a refreshing conversation about embracing the opportunities and just navigating through some of the wrenches that are coming our way in the industry. Before we get started, I wanted to give a thank you to our elite corporate sponsors, Globe Media Group, Google, Roku, Snapchat, and the Trade Desk. And of course, today we're featuring Environics, and one of my favorite media leaders of all time is here to speak with us. It's Jan Kestle, who is the president of Environics. And one of the things that I love about speaking with Jan is the fact that Jan got the memo about privacy quite a long time ago, when this was just really bubbling under as a conversation that was not too popular. And working behind the scenes on solutions and getting to the bottom of what does privacy by design look like, Jan has been there the whole way. So Jan, I'm going to hand it over to you. Welcome to the discussion this afternoon, and I'm so grateful for you spending the time with us. I wanted to give you a couple of minutes just to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Environics and what's happening there. And then we can kick off a great conversation about privacy.
Thanks, Sonia. It's a pleasure to be here. We've really been happy to partner and work more closely with the IAB in the last couple of years, and to be a sponsor of the work that you do, because it's so important to bring the work that we're doing around customer insights, location intelligence, media planning, across that great divide about how we take great research and information and insight and actually put it into practice. And who better to collaborate and learn from on that than the IAB? I chuckled a bit there when you said your favorite media leader. I think in my decades of being a statistician and leading data and analytics organizations, I've always found the media side kind of a mystery. So I have a lot of good support and a lot of people helping me understand, including the industry leaders. But how we translate what we do with data into actual actionable insights that we can, I'm going to use the word action like 10 times in the same sentence, but we can go and take action of it against, and then actually measure what's working and what's not working is the most exciting part. In terms of what's happening at Environics Analytics, I guess people know us as the providers of great third-party data, and for decades we've produced demographics and behavioral data and media data and the Prism segmentation system and our wealth data. It's widely used by brands. About 80% of our business is directly with businesses, but in the last few years we've also started to work with agencies and platforms so that the data that we produce to help people understand their customers can be available to the actual activation and measurement side. But we continue to constantly and produce new data. We've been working with big data. So we work with what's called human movement data to understand where people go through the day and who drives by the Costco to go to the Walmart, or who is spending more time at home and going back to work. So all of that big data can help with insights as well. And we see our business evolving from producing data, both our traditional and our newer kind of data, embedding that data in platform. We have a system called Envision that people have been using for years, but now we're moving that to being a cloud native platform that allows people to use not only our data, but our workflows and our methodologies to really answer specific business questions. And then finally, we've been looking at how to connect that data and insight and methodology, that's really our specialty, out there into the ad tech world. So it's no longer a PowerPoint game where you get segmentation and detailed personas, and then the media buyer has to translate that back into something. We're actually able, to a pretty large extent, and not perfect yet, but we're actually able to help people take the work that they do with us and activate it in the ad tech partnerships that we have with the DSPs, with other programmatic players. So that's the new Environics. And some people say to me all the time, oh, I didn't know that you guys were really playing in the technology and the platform space. We think of you as insights, or we think of you as location. So we want people to understand that customer insights, location, media planning, and finally that holy grail, we're investing a lot right now in how we can help people measure the business outcomes of the money that they're investing in data and analytics. And it's that end to end, using the same data and measuring, that really requires us to do a deep dive on privacy and what we can do and what we should do and how we do it. And that's why I'm excited to talk to you about it today.
Well,
Last caveat, I have to say to our listeners, remember, I'm not a lawyer, so I have a lot of opinions, but I always get legal advice in terms of what we're doing. But I will talk a lot about what we think about privacy and what best practice is, but it's not legal advice. It's just my opinion as a statistician.
I think that's great. And being a statistician actually puts you ahead of most people who are privacy enthusiasts at best, right? Thank you for that introduction to Environics. It's quite a progressive story. And not a lot of data companies or traditional data companies have been able to cross that divide. So that takes a tremendous amount of leadership and also change management. And so when I think about that, and I think that recently you had an event in Toronto, it was your user conference where you were talking about the fact that privacy in the advertising game, or in most games, has to come from the top down. It's something that needs to be led from the top, and it's certainly obviously your approach. But can you talk a little bit more about that and why you think that's the way to go for organizations?
For sure. Everyone's very anxious to be data driven, and that's a common goal. We've been talking about it for 10 years. Lots of money's been invested in helping organizations organize and take advantage of data that they have inside their organizations. I'm talking about the brands for the most part. So there's been lots of investment in data and technology, and everybody agrees that the opportunity is there and that an organization really needs to be data driven. But in order to be data driven, you have to use data that you collect from your customers, or use data that organizations like ourselves and others bring together in that whole workflow. And if you're the CEO of a consumer facing company, there's three things that you don't want to have happen. Number one, you don't want to be accused of being a Luddite, not using data. So you have to make that a part of your business strategy. But secondly, you do not want to use data in a way that inappropriately upsets your customers. And that seems obvious, but the whole question of how often should I contact them if I have the permission to contact them directly, or if I'm using signal data and de-identified data, but I'm still creating custom audiences and targeting, what's the appropriate frequency? When I'm thinking about how do I use data and how do I connect better, you have to put yourself in the customer's shoes and say, what do people really want? We know that people like to receive advertising that's relevant, but how often? And do they want to see it on the three different screens? And if they do, should the message be the same? And so thinking about that customer experience is an important part of designing your data-driven strategy. So you don't want to not use data, but you don't want to just use data for the sake of and get analysis paralysis and throw everything at everybody. Consumers are really busy. People are really busy. So we've always seen that relevant advertising is really important to them. But at the same time, after I go online and I buy that thing, I don't want to get a message for the next 6 months because I actually already bought it. So making sure your customer experience is central. And then finally, no CEO wants to hear that the privacy commissioner is investigating what you're doing with your customer data. That's the worst nightmare. So I believe it's our job in the data business to get out in front, and acknowledge that, yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty and we've had changes in the law over the last 20 years. I see so many organizations who've invested so much in making sure that they're doing the right thing. But in an atmosphere right now where there is uncertainty and there's political ambivalence around what we should do, I think it's really important for us as an industry, both suppliers who are working with the brands, the agencies, the platforms, and the associations like yourselves. And we work with the IAB and the RCC and the CMA and many others, is that as an industry, we really take it off the table. We're not waiting to see whether or not it's okay. We need to make sure that we understand the principle. The principle of the existing law says, do what a reasonable person would reasonably expect. Be sure you've told people what you're going to do. Be sure that you are following privacy impact studies, that you're only using the data for the purpose intended. So I think that's why I say it has to come from above, because if it just comes from the legal department, there may be more restrictions than what are necessary. And if it just comes from the data geeks, we'll all get really excited about all the things we could possibly do. So it has to be a business strategy. And I'm seeing that more and more, that it's the C-suite, it's not just the CMO, it's the CMO and the CTO and the governance people are saying, hey, we have to leverage data, and not just in Canada. Canada's got some specific challenges, but we have to figure out what data are important, how is it going to impact our relationship with our own customers, and what can we reasonably do in order to make sure that we have a better experience? Because what the C-suite really cares about is results, outcomes, financial. Is my business doing better as a result of all of this? Not, do I have the best data? Did I spend the most money? Do I have the latest AI tools? We want all that, but it's for a business purpose. And that's where we're looking for the leadership to come from.
Yeah, IAB Canada has been living, breathing, and eating privacy since 2017 when they announced the coming of the GDPR. And as an industry, I think it took a really long time for the right audiences to be paying attention to the privacy message, right? And so now I feel like we've come a long way. The people who are attending conferences and discussions like this one today are varied now. So we're getting cross-organization involvement and engagement, almost to the point, Jan, where I'm going to say we are almost an industry obsessed with privacy. So we're talking about it night and day. We're coming up with solutions. Environics certainly has several of their own. And I guess this leads to the next question. Do Canadians care as much as we do? And we talk about the reasonable person, but when you think about social media and you think about the way that people are using the internet on a day-to-day basis, laymen, as it were, do they care about privacy as much as we are caring about privacy?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think the answer is the same answer that we get to a lot of questions about populism and new media and new technology. It's horses for courses. Different people have different opinions. And I think that the research shows over the years that people are interested in receiving messages and they want to make sure that the messages are relevant. In that way, they care about advertising. It's not that they don't want to get any messages, but do they care? I think they do. I think there's some popular myths that young people don't care. They post everything on social media. Actually, the truth is, they know how to control who gets to see their stuff and who doesn't. Maybe some older generations didn't, and they thought, oh, everything's just out there. I think some people care. A lot of people care. I think people definitely care about fraud and identity theft and those kinds of things. And I think it's also a question of trust. If I'm going to give a retailer or a service provider a lot of information about me, I expect them to do the right thing. I give them information mostly so that they can make my experience good. So I think it's mixed, but I don't think it would be safe at all at this time to presume that people don't care. And I think that most survey research shows that people are willing to share data if it's used appropriately, but they want to make sure that the organizations not only have the proper use cases, but have the security and the governance rules in place that the data are used for the right thing. We're still seeing that that definitely hasn't gone away. People expect that. The truth is that I think that a lot of Canadian businesses have done a great job. I don't think when we see the odd so-called breach that reaches the front pages of the newspaper, number one, sometimes it's just really bad actors, and the real telling point is what people do in the face of that, which organizations have to prepare for that. But the other side is sometimes there's something that appears maybe to be out of whack with current best practice. And then there's an investigation and it was really close to the edge and it wasn't really over the line, but we need to do it differently. So I think that people do care, but I think businesses care. And I think one of the biggest challenges in Canada is that we have had legislation pending for quite a long time. And everyone's got a different idea about where that's going to end up and what it's going to be like. We have to remember that the law that currently governs privacy in Canada and the private sector, the PIPEDA legislation, is over 20 years old. And it has treaty equivalency with GDPR. GDPR changed a lot of things. It brought to other parts of the world the kinds of privacy constraints that we've been living with in Canada since the 2000. I think that it's good that it's in focus now, and I think the fact that what's happening in Europe and other parts of the world, and even to a certain extent in the US, which was the last frontier, means that there is a more of a business consensus as well as a popular consensus that it's important.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you think about the mainstreaming of privacy in a way, right? So consumers have been made aware of the privacy factor online as a result of whether it's technical competitive activity, right? So people actually making it a competitive advantage to be privacy centric, or because of headlines in the news. So I think that the awareness is definitely there. To build off of that, when you think about the consumers and the way that they think about privacy, and now the extension of that is my privacy has value. So my data and my personal information has value. And if the conversation in digital advertising right now is moving towards, hey, shore up your first party data, get close with your customer, make sure that they're sharing information and that you're keeping it safe and that there's a good value exchange. What does that look like? How do businesses compete when everybody is now, remember the days of Castle when we had to do double opt-in and suddenly everybody was your best friend on email, asking for you to double opt into their email database. How do businesses navigate this now, right? Like the value exchange for the data.
I think it's good news that people are really we've always understood, even from gosh, in the late 90s when we started to move from in CompuSearch and Environics, when we moved from postal codes to CRM. And I have this diagram I've been using for 20 years that says what we specialize is in helping you combine your first party data with our third party data in a way that helps you fill in the gaps, provides you more insight, enables you to look inside your organization, outside your organization. That's been our mantra. But now, with the kind of focus on privacy and governance, there's a resurgence in the value of first party data, and yet a lot more emphasis on the governance rules around it. So we see people having to adopt consent management platforms and different kinds of tools. But I think that it also means there's an opportunity for organizations to partner. And we think about email and a double opt-in, and I can send you a message because you agreed that I could send with a partner, blah, blah. It was very complicated. But one of the things we're seeing and we're very engaged with is how two organizations can blend their first party data in order to understand the gap or the overlap or the white space for partnerships, or how two organizations like a broadcaster and a retailer can combine two sets of first party data to answer the question, who saw my ad versus who bought my stuff. That's a pretty important blending of first party data. And we've been working, as a lot of people know, on the kind of how do we provide clean room, which is a safe technical place to enable two sets of first-party data to be blended in a way where you can get good matches and you can analyze the overlap and analyze exposed versus response, but not have either party get the other party's data. That's what clean rooms and identity resolution are all about. And there's a lot of stuff being written about it. We've invested heavily for the past 2.5 years in creating clean room spaces, which is really setting up a cloud-based environment where two sets of data can be connected and analysis can take place, where each party is responsible for their consents, where we're responsible for best practices in matching, where analysis takes place around either the size of the overlap or it's the channel or the response rates, and then the results that come out the other end are anonymized or aggregated in a way that's consistent with privacy best practice. So we're enabling the combination in data collaboration hubs of disparate sets of data, but we're still building them in a way that we think is consistent with best practices for Canada. And we see this as a really big opportunity, is people need to use their own data the best they can, but they also need to use it in an ecosystem of others. And all of the technology and all of the software can't necessarily accommodate every different country's specific rules. So it's like we're trying to provide middleware. We're trying to provide solutions that help global brands working in Canada or Canadian only brands partner with others so that we can really combine all different kinds of data. I'm going on too long, but the one thing I think it's always funny that everybody talks about, well, what's the best kind of data? Is the one-to-one data that if everything about your customer and you just want to make sure that they continue to be your customer and you can send messages to them because you have all the opt-ins, and well, that's great. But most people need more customers and most people need partnerships and most people need to actually measure what works and what doesn't. And that's where the first-party data that we're starting to liberate makes sense. But we have to understand, what can we really do? We've gone down the road of doing a privacy impact study on data that comes into a collaboration hub, and then doing collaboration work that's specific to an agreed upon business purpose by an advertiser and a publisher or by two separate brands. So they've said they specifically want to understand this thing. So this kind of work will be done inside this privacy framework. And then data will come out the other end. And if it's necessary that those data be anonymized and aggregated, we will submit that whole process to a test of whether or not you could reasonably re-identify an individual. That's part of privacy by design. But if you have combined two sets of data and the permissions are there and that organization can go ahead and retarget, then you do that. So the devil's in the detail, and what we need is a governance layer and a statistical layer and a delivery mechanism that allows the different kinds of data to be used for different things. And that gets pretty complex from a technology point of view.
Finally, everybody is envious of being a statistician in our field, at least. While you were talking about this, there was a question that popped up around the GDPR and legitimate interest, the bane of our existence right now, and the fact that clean rooms are operating under, whether or not clean rooms operate under legitimate interest. I have thoughts on it, but I'll let you answer. From your perspective, how do you see this playing out in Canada, legitimate interest, and whether or not that's going to cover off the use of clean rooms?
I think, yeah, the way we're thinking about clean rooms in Canada is for a specific period of time for a specific purpose, where the owners of the data have to take responsibility for the use case and the analysis that's done. And yes, I think that by definition, we are going to combine data and use data in a way that would be defined as the legitimate interest use case for the organization that collected the data. And that it has to be that way. We can't have, in Canada, we're not going to be able to have broad consortia of all kinds of data that's coming together, that's creating identity graphs that are permanent and stuff like that, because then you wouldn't be able to understand what was disclosed in the transparency and consent framework and what the purpose was. So it has to be built in, and don't want to dismiss it as easy. This is the hardest part. But what we're investing in, and we partnered with a global player called LiveRamp that all over the world builds clean rooms and also helps with identity resolution, which basically means understanding that these eyeballs and those eyeballs are the same person, right? If you want to boil down. So they've been providing those solutions all over the world. And their first ventures were in the US, where they were able to do great work over the last decade in that regard. And then when they went to Europe and looked at the GDPR, they had to build more additional more additional processes into their technology. It's a technology firm that's providing ways to spin up clean rooms, ways to look at identity resolution where the proper consents are in place, using anonymized or pseudonymized data, using risk of re-identification. So when they came to Canada, and they decided to come to Canada through us because we understood the Canadian data and we also understood where we thought the law was going to end up. We all know the law. We don't know what's going to happen with it. But I think that the implementation of any clean room, and by the way, we're working with LiveRamp as the ad tech layer, but we have our own EA Vault clean rooms. We partner with Snowflake and others because clean rooms have to be interoperable. So I think that we can't rely on the technology to solve these legal problems. We have to rely on ourselves and our understanding of the business problems and our understanding of what's legitimate for our own use and what's legitimate to partner. But we have to harden into the tech platforms the ways of having the safeguards and also of measuring the potential for risk at the other end. And so that's why we went for our ISO 31700 certification on privacy by design as well. We knew we were doing clean room work, we were doing identity resolution by bringing different kinds of IDs together, but we knew that we had to have a series of principles. And so privacy by design was actually started in Ontario, but has become a world standard. And there's a series of steps that you have to go through, which I won't go through them all. But when we decided to get that certification, it was because we knew that PIPEDA was old, that changes were going to be made, and that even though PIPEDA is a principle-based law that solves most of the problems, we knew that it was really created before there was digital ad tech. So we knew the interpretation of that law had to be applied to the new reality of the things that businesses need to do. And we went through the certification, and just before we were finished getting our kind of industry certification, ISO came out with an even higher standard. And one of the key things that was brought to our attention in looking at that standard was not only when you're using data that might be pseudonymized or you're aggregating data so that it's anonymized, you also have to really make sure not only that there's extremely low or no risk of re-identification, but take it even further and make sure there's no perception that you're identifying information about individuals. So that meant in the tech platforms that we're building, we have to check the data, we have to look at the flow throughs, we have to make sure that if we're saying this group of people, which might be a fairly small cohort, like there's 20 people maybe living in a postal code or 50 people, we have to make sure that based on the input to any analysis, that the result that's coming out the other end passes a test that you couldn't make an inference about who that person was. It's pretty technical, but it's also pretty cool that you can bring the technology and this methodology and the legal issues together, and you can write it in code, and you can have it be a governance layer in a clean room that by showing that documentation, you can help an organization feel comfortable that they're maintaining their pledge and their trust with their customers. That's what's really exciting to us.
Yeah, I think I've used this phrase a couple of times now as we muddle through privacy developments in Canada. In sewing, they use the term measure twice, cut once. And in privacy and in tech, for policy related tech, it's so important for us not to build things that are band-aid solutions that then have to be built on top of, and then on top of, and then on top of, as slight changes happen. We call that tech debt. And so one of the refreshing things that I heard you say this afternoon was you partnered with LiveRamp, and LiveRamp has been battered a little bit through the US regulatory systems. And there's 25 different state laws and a new one coming every day. There's the GDPR, and then there's the upcoming CPPA or C27 if it passes. I wonder, what would you say to advertisers? How can marketers prepare to avoid tech debt, right? So how do you make the right investments at a time when things feel uncertain, right? We don't know if the bill is going to pass. We don't know what's going to happen, whether we're going to get a new government in the next few months. We don't know anything. So
Right.
what would be your advice to marketers?
Well, I think we have to build best practices, and I think it's I think it was this, can't remember, it's one of the consulting firms. I don't want to attribute the wrong one, but one of their privacy experts, I remember a talk saying, build it in, don't bolt it on.
Yeah.
And building it in, and what we're doing with our clean room initiatives, both with LiveRamp and the layers we're building, is taking the best practice that we learned from our ISO certification and actually building it in. And not so if C27 passes, we feel confident that we will be compliant. If it doesn't pass, we feel confident that we have built technology that has best practices, that's consistent with the GDPR's goals and objectives, that's actually compliant with Law 25. So I think that we have to move forward as a data and an ad tech industry to enable the use of first party data and measurement. And so our investment and our commitment with our technology partners is to build something that works for Canada, given this uncertainty, but that will be future proof and ISO 31700 was not a small feat. It took us hundreds of thousands of dollars and years, and we're a little company, and we were actually the second company in the world to get it. And why would a Canadian company want to do it? It's partly because of this uncertainty. I'm not going to say we've solved it 100%, but I believe we've done everything possible to understand where we're going to end up, to understand what the different arguments are within the law, and to build technology that's going to enable people to use their first party data and use it for activation and measurement in a way that it's going to provide them really good outcomes measurement, and that they're not going to be in violation. I think that's where we're at right now. Canada's not an island. It's interesting for me, over the years, I've built partnerships with data partners and technology firms for the last 30 years. And it's always interesting. Some people view Canada as part of international. And that's great, because in the US, they do things so differently, and Canada's special and blah, blah, blah. Other people consider Canada part of North America. Oh, you can't do that because Canada's different. The reality is, and we really benefited from this in our partnership with LiveRamp. They understood that what they were doing in the US wasn't going to work in Canada. They had the intervening experience of looking at Europe, but then they understood that Canada wasn't necessarily exactly like Europe either. And so the partnership where they relied on a data firm in Canada to bring the governance layer, but still we're not going to build a whole ad tech system that's just Canadian. I have to be a crazy raving nationalist to think that we can service our needs in Canada without understanding that the holdcos have to have a part of it. And even though we have banks and telecoms that are Canadian only, we have car companies and CPG companies and retailers that need global systems. Putting together the best technology around the world, even though it might not work perfectly in Canada, but adjusting it so that it's got the necessary controls. I think that we have a big opportunity over the next 5 years. We can't sit and wait and see what's going to happen. We have to invest in best practices. The industry has to work together, both the technology and the analytics firms and the platforms. And we have to, whether there's an election or not an election, or the law passes or not a law, we have to move forward. And that's I'm very appreciative, by the way, that our owner, Bell, has invested for Environics to be that independent end-to-end measurement solution. A lot of people were skeptical. They said, was Bell going to really let Environics maintain that? But they absolutely have. We're 4 years in. They've invested in our ability to measure outcomes, and they've invested in our privacy strategy and our governance implementation so that we can bring this along with other partners to the Canadian marketplace. And we're super excited about our opportunity to do that.
That's amazing. Before I open it up to questions, I did have another probe just to see. I think that most people that are, I guess, in the solutions space for privacy believe in this are working really hard 24/7 to make sure that the industry keeps its lights on. What do you hear from like the marketers or for the buy side? Do you think that there's uptick? Do you think that there's enough adoption? Do you think the industry is moving fast enough to take advantage of some of these best practices, or would you like to see it move faster?
We all would like to see it move faster, but these are big decisions. We're coming out of a tough time. So I know when we launched our kind of heightened clean room identity resolution outcomes measurement program in April, we immediately heard from over 100 organizations, and I'm talking actual brands and advertisers, who said, we need to hear more about this. And then we moved quickly into almost 30 proofs of concept. Yes, I would love everybody to adopt, and I would love us. We have partnerships with agencies, we have partnerships with DSPs, we have partnerships with other platforms. I feel like that from our perspective, there's a lot of people willingness to try things. And yeah, the solution isn't going to be perfect, but we fine tune it and with the community of the coalition of the willing, is that or the consortium of the willing,
Mhm.
we're going to try things and we're not going to let perfect get in the way of really good. Yeah, I wish it was faster. We all do because we're all feeling that in our businesses right now. But the
And
fact that we can actually right now look at exposures on linear TV from all major broadcasters, and we can look at connected TV, and we can look at digital, and we can look at digital out of home, and we can look at walled gardens. And in a way, we can show the cross-screen and cross-media outcome. And we can also show the cross-media and cross-screen reach and frequency. And we can do that right now and are doing that right now. And a year ago in Canada, it really wasn't something we can do. I'm super excited about that.
that's really cool. And sorry, I keep trying to wind down, but there's always more. It's like the hiccups. But earlier you mentioned that a big part of your service or a big part of the benefit of engaging with a platform like Environics and LiveRamp is that you can fill the gaps, right? And when I hear you talking about this great opportunity, and it sounds like it's full service. It sounds like you're going to hold hands and take people through this process, especially if they're interested in learning more. What would you say to an organization who is a little self-conscious and feeling like they don't have enough data to play with?
Yeah, we've always had this at Environics Analytics, whether we're talking about collaboration or we've serviced big and small customers in our whole 20 years. People say to me, I want to try something. I want to do some collaboration. Was there a $15,000 option or is it $1 million option? Honestly, there's everything in between. And that's why we have, and it sounds like a commercial, but that's why we have go-to-market people who work on an industry basis. We do segmentation, we do personification, we do retail analysis, we do media planning. We can help you now, that buy, and we can help you measure the outcome, and we can do it big or we can do it small. Now, if we do it, and in terms of the technology, we're licensing the technology, the LiveRamp EA Vault technology in combination, the Canadianized version. We're licensing that to organizations who want to be self-serve. We're hosting it for organizations who can't afford or don't have the capability to implement it themselves. And we're doing managed services, just pure project work for small organizations who want to get started. This is not something that is just a solution for the largest banks and telecoms and retailers. Everybody needs this. And we've always prided ourselves in being able to deliver our services in different ways for different people. And we're definitely committed to maintaining that.
That's great. Well, that's so Canadian. I see a question has popped up. Anonymous listener would love your thoughts on ID bridging.
This is kind of the crux of what needs to happen. If consumer has given consent for their ID to be used, and that ID then becomes pseudonymized, and then that goes into a place where it can be matched, then you're going to get one ID matched to another. We can encode an internal database with an ID that can help an organization look at different consumers across different parts of their silos where they don't have permission. We can then take that and we can lift it up and add a ramp ID to it, which is the ability in a safe place, in an encrypted way, to know that this pseudonymized person is that, and then we get aggregate results coming out the other end. But those IDs could also be linked to a Trade Desk ID or the Google Pair or some other ID that a loyalty program or a shopping program could have of their own. So rather than the old-fashioned thinking that we're going to know that Jan Kestle lives at this address with this email, these 3 email addresses and this, we're not going to have that, but we have that technical capability of creating unique pseudonymized IDs within one environment, lifting them up into a place where in an encrypted way, they can be linked to someone else and then be aggregated, and that risk of re-identification can be assessed and results can be provided. And that's what's happening in Canada. In fact, I believe that is going to be the world standard. I think the offline to online kinds of stuff that are happening now. I'm not saying it's illegal in other parts of the world, but I think most businesses are going to be satisfied with that, and that's going to be the way we operate. So interoperability, linking of one ID to the other, and of course, we're trying to scale audiences. We're also trying to do lookalikes. So the more we have data that can safely be linked and aggregated and used, but still be compliant with the way the privacy laws seem to be heading, then people will be able to do more effective targeting and measurement.
We certainly have our work cut out for ourselves, right? We're going through so many hoops. And one of the things that I think that bears repeating every single time we talk about this is the value exchange. And the idea of let's not mess this up further. If we're going to invest this much in privacy protected advertising and these amazing new solutions, make sure the creative is on point. Make sure you're spending time investing in areas that are going to delight the consumer and let's clean up the industry. Let's clean up the supply chain and make this fun again.
And I think there's a lot of support for that. We also support, as the CA and the ICA and the ACA. We sponsored the Marketing Effectiveness Awards for the agency and the agency event. And one of the really cool things about that was actually talking to the more creative side of the agencies and helping them explain that being data-driven isn't just a media issue. We talk about get the right message to the right people at the right time. Some of us have been striving for this for decades. So I'm excited that in our relationships, both with the larger holdcos and the independent agencies, that we're not just talking to the media people. And in the brand side, we sometimes talking about to brand as well as to the actual media people. This is what the industry needs is an integrated view of how the data can help people be more successful.
Yeah, agree. Okay, with that, if there are any other questions, we'll wait a couple of seconds just to see if anything comes up. But in the meantime, Jan, this has been such a great conversation, and it's always a pleasure catching up with you. I know that you're super busy, but you're doing all the right things, it sounds, and you're innovating, you're putting Canada on the global stage, you're doing the right partnerships. It's a lot of fun to watch. And we certainly value your partnership and your support at the IAB.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And just to say, we also are extremely excited about continuing to collaborate with you. And I'm always happy. We always meet at events and we talk about all these things and we said, okay, let's do it and record it for other people to get engaged in the conversation. So thank you very much, Sonia, for the opportunity to do this.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Jan. Have a great afternoon.